Right, 7 o'clock, so if everybody's here, we'll get going. Can everybody hear me first of all? We've got microphones for the candidates. I'm going to shout, and they can pass the microphones between themselves for the questions. Thanks very much for coming to first hustings for the candidates, I think. There's another one tomorrow night at Beverley Minster. Starts at 7 o'clock, so if you enjoy yourself tonight, you can always go along to Beverley Minster tomorrow and see the same people doing pretty much the same thing. We have a couple of apologies. Chris Collin, who represents the SDP, he can't come tonight, so we don't have him. And Dennis Healy, who's the candidate for the Liberal Democrats, he can't make it tonight, but we do have Linda Johnson at the end here, who's standing in for Dennis. Now Linda is standing actually in the West Hull, or Hull West and Halton Price constituency for the Liberal Democrats. So she is a parliamentary candidate, but not for this constituency. But she is here representing the Lib Dems. And just one other thing to say on that, if there's anything really sort of specific for a question for this particular constituency, Linda obviously is not really from this part of the world, she's representing somewhere else, or would like to. So I will excuse her on that count. Just the usual preliminaries. Toilets are over there. If there's an emergency, there's a fire door there. And if anybody has any problems with sound, please just shout and raise your hand, and I'll try and shout a little bit louder. We are filming tonight. It's been organised, this event, by Ray Duffel here from the Hedon Blog. I'm sure a lot of people know Ray, and he will be broadcasting this on the various channels that he's responsible for. As part of the organisation of this, we invited people to submit questions for the candidates, and we got a good reply. And we're going to go through the first 7 of those questions a bit later on. I understand that some people who are here tonight have agreed that they want to read out the questions, so we'll do that. But first of all, I'd like each of the candidates to introduce themselves, say a little bit about themselves and a little bit about why people on July the 4th should vote for themselves and also their party. I'm going to give them 2 minutes each, so it's a 2-minute manifesto. We're trying to shorten the evening a little bit. It was going to be 3, but it's now 2 minutes each to sell themselves, if you like. And at the end of the 2 minutes, if they're still talking, I've got a little prop here, which will be a signal for them to kindly shut up and move on to the next one. So without any further ado, and I'm just going to pick these sort of randomly, although people are actually sat alphabetically here. So first of all, for a 2-minute slot, we'll have George McManus from the Yorkshire Party.
Thank you very much, Angus. Yes, George McManus from the Yorkshire Party. It sounds rather strange even to me. I don't actually come from Yorkshire originally. I'm a West Coaster, as we say. But I've been a passionate advocate of devolution all my life. From my early days in Scotland, when I realised that devolution was going to be really important to the constitution, not only of Scotland but of the whole country. I'm a retired civil engineer living in Long Riston with Deborah, and I've been a political activist all my life. I can't emphasise enough how important I think it is that Yorkshire gets the sort of benefits from regional devolved government that Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, London already enjoy. Because it's quite clear that the Tories have failed with their levelling up agenda. As reported by the Economic Institute at the weekend, the Yorkshire economy has failed to recover more. It's had the lowest level of recovery since the pandemic of any region in the country. That is a clear indication that levelling up hasn't worked. Labour has been unable to deliver constitutional change for devolution for the regions, although it was in their manifesto in 1900. the very first Labour manifesto promised English regional government. And I was really proud of the fact that I was invited to take part in the negotiations in 2004, which came within a hair's breadth of getting us a devolved parliament for Yorkshire. It never happened, and the main reason it never happened, I'll say it quietly, was because of Sir Humphrey. Some of you will remember Yes Minister, and some of you will remember Sir Humphrey, the top civil servant. It was that level of the establishment that got in the way of setting up regional devolution. It was scuppered in 2004 because poor Sir Humphrey nearly had a heart attack.
Sorry, George.
And I'll leave it for that.
That was told. Right, John OTTOWAY, who represents Alliance for Democracy and Freedom. John.
Do you press this to start?
It's on. Off you go.
No, it's just...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming along. My name is John OTTOWAY, and I'm representing the Alliance for Freedom and Democracy for Beverley and Holderness. So first of all, what is the Alliance for Freedom and Democracy? It's a freedom-loving party, and it was formed basically about 3 years ago, 2020, 4 years ago then, 2020, by 3 ex-UKIPers. One of whom you might know is the party chairman, Mike Hookham, who lives in East Hull, and one Conservative candidate, who's our leader, Dr. Ted Kong, and he was a GP all his working life, recently retired, because he's one of the few GPs that spoke out about the vaccine damages he was seeing as a GP and the young people coming in with myocarditis. So he thought something had to be done about it. So they formed the Alliance for Democracy and Freedom, and then they got members who agreed with their views to join up around the country. So we are actually all independent candidates standing under their umbrella. We have no party whip whatsoever, so we can work for our own constituents, but we all have the same beliefs that our governments are frankly, nowadays they're corrupt, all of them, and they're working for the New World Order and Agenda 2025, Agenda 2030 and so on, and they're not working for us. So what are our major policies? Well, the ones that we disagree with, no lockdowns again ever for anything. We're not having the WHO control our health in the next pandemic, because Tedros is a crook basically. He doesn't deserve to control anybody's health. What we're pro bodily autonomy. So if you want the vaccine, have the vaccine, but have it when you've been told all the information. Not, oh, it's 100% safe and effective, which it's obviously proving not to be. It's not, it's safe, and it's not effective. It's not stopped anybody from getting the jab. And, you know, and it's not stopped it spreading to granny. So all the younger people were told, oh, you must have the vaccine, because it's, or else you'll spread it to granny. That's untrue.
Next up we'll have Margaret Pinder for the Labour Party.
Thank you. I can probably manage without actually, yes. I'm Margaret Pinder, and now in this election in Beverley Holderness we're on the cusp of a historic moment. It's never been closer. This is the chance for this constituency to elect its first Labour MP and its first female MP. I grew up in the East Riding. My daughter and I went to school here, and I've been a councillor here. I'm chair of several arts charities here. By training, I'm a lawyer. I worked in the city, I've worked on Wall Street, I've taught in the university sector, I've run my own business, I've worked in the public sector as well, managing large public sector infrastructure projects on public procurement, prison bill, decent homes. So I've got wide experience. In the pandemic, I worked on the vaccination programme, and I was very proud to do so because I thought it made a huge difference to this country. 14 years of the Tory government has failed. This is our chance to have a change. I'm hearing it again and again on the doorstep. If you look at the polls, this is not me giving you spin, look at the independent polls. We are close to having a complete change of hope in this constituency. And the message I give is hope. Graham will tell you to be afraid of Labour, of all the other parties, of the things that they're making up that we're going to be doing. Do you want a government that makes you afraid, or do you want a government that gives you hope, that actually makes you feel that the future can be better, that we can do better, that things that are on their knees can be made better? I believe we can, and I hope that listening to me here this evening, you will feel, even if you've been lifelong voters for other parties, that given it's so close, Labour is the party. Lend me your vote, and then it's up to me to reward that trust over the next 5 years, to bring levelling up as something that's real, to put East Yorkshire, give a strong voice at Westminster in a strong Labour government for this constituency. Thank you.
Next up, Andrew Smith from Reform UK.
Good evening, I'm Andrew Smith, Reform UK. I'm from West Yorkshire, but I've lived in the East Riding for the last 5 years. I have to say, I love it. I talk straight, I don't sugarcoat anything at all whatsoever. I don't subscribe to any of the woke trans agenda. If a guy's walking down the street and he gets offended because I don't like his lipstick and skirt, I'm sorry, it's his problem, not mine. I will tell you everything just as I see it. Fact, not manipulated statistics. I'm acting for reform because both of the two main parties, whichever administrations you want over the last 20 or 30 years, have made an absolute mess of it. The country is nearly skint. We're invaded, we're overloaded with people, and something needs to be done. And I think we, Reform, are the only people that can do it. Thank you.
Next up, Jonathan Stevenson from the Green Party.
Hello, so I'm Jonathan Stevenson, I'm representing the Green Party, and similar to others here, I'm not from the East Riding, if you couldn't already tell. So I was born and raised over in Manchester, and that's where I met my wife, who is a Yorkshire lass who was born on Yorkshire Day, and recently she managed to corral me back to the East Riding, where we now live in Beverley. So growing up for me, politics was not something I really thought about. The world just sort of ticked on by. Things were good. And then sort of over the last, I would say, 14 years, especially around the Brexit referendum, it became very apparent very quickly the devastating impact of political mismanagement. We've seen our NHS chronically underfunded, our public services carved out, and now with the country on its knees, we have the spectre of populism lurking on the horizon. Beyond that, I see anthropogenic climate change as one of the biggest threats that we have to the globe, not just the country. We see it with our farmers, who have to deal with unbelievable weather patterns that aren't predictable. It affects crop yields, it affects their ability to make a living, and it's only going to get worse unless we actually do something about it. I'm running for the Green Party because I see them as the only party that offer transformative change that is going to give real hope to people. I see myself as a possibilist, which is basically we've done incredible things as a species, as a country, and we can do those things again. We don't have to accept this as the new normal. I always say that the best societies are those...
With coat bills.
Guess the word that he was going to say there. Next up, we have Graham Stewart from the Conservative Party.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm sorry Jonathan got cut off just as he was getting into his stride. I've been the Member of Parliament for the last 19 years. I've loved being your local champion, working with people. I can see Councillor Gallant from the Labour Party in the audience, George, who used to be in the Labour Party, and others with whom I've worked to try and find solutions to problems, whether it was a Humber, bridge tolls and persuading the powers that be to changing that, to getting community health services that recognise the realities of a rural area. Together we have done so much. I've loved doing it. I want to continue to be a champion for Beverley and Holderness, making sure that from Withensea to Hedon to Beverley to Skirler and beyond, that they all get listened to. And working with councillors, we've got Councillor DENIS locally here in the audience tonight. So many people from so many parties working together to make life better. I don't accept that this country is broken. We're actually on the cusp of really good years ahead. We've come through the pandemic, we've managed our way through the energy crisis. In this constituency we have unemployment now of just 2.4%, fraction of what it was under Labour. We have our schools transformed. Only 60% were good or outstanding in 2010. Now in the East Riding it's 87%. This is a fantastic area. We have huge opportunities, not least in green industries, where we have remarkable asset. If we all work together as a community, if you retain me as your community champion, I will always put community ahead of party politics and determined to make positive difference so that the lives of people here, and the many people who have struggled with the cost of living, that we actually keep focusing on helping those who have got least, but actually we also celebrate so many strengths in this area, so many strengths in this country, and we refuse to either allow us locally or nationally to be talked down. We should think positively and play a positive contribution not only for the country, but actually as a nation in the world at large, which we've done in Ukraine and other topics. Thank you all very much.
Bang on 2 minutes. You can tell he's a politician, can't you? Yeah. And finally, Linda Johnson from the Liberal Democrats.
Well, good evening everybody, and thank you so much for coming. I'm standing in for Dennis Healy, who is your Liberal Democrat candidate in this election. We in the Liberal Democrats are absolutely passionate about fairness and making sure that everyone is treated equitably and respectfully, where no one is constrained by poverty or lack of education or for being who they want to be and who they are. Our policies are all reviewed through a lens of fairness, and we want implementation of them devolved down to you, the people, as far as possible, so that you can make the decisions that matter to you. Life under the Conservatives has been anything but fair. People of all ages, as we know, are struggling. They're having to use food banks. They're having to having to choose between eating and heating in some cases. Getting an appointment with a doctor or dentist is nigh on impossible, and the waiting lists in our NHS are as long as you could possibly imagine them and getting longer by the minute. Schools and colleges are underfunded, including SEND colleges and schools, which is restricting our children from achieving their true potential. Our rivers and waterways and air are being polluted by big multinational companies, and yet we allow them to do so. Our climate crisis is just being ignored in favour of the fossil fuel industries and corporate pension funds. And local authorities are being asked to do more and more with less and less, and they are being blamed for it when actually it's the government that's not funding them properly. Well, we don't just need a change in government, we need a change in the way in which politics is run and the way people are treated, and that means a revolution, and that means voting in the Liberal Democrats on the July the 4th in 2024. We will ensure that everyone's votes counts by bringing in proportional representation, because at the moment just one person getting one more vote than anybody else will mean that everybody else's vote is ignored. How is that fair? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the candidates' contributions. We're going to go to questions from the audience. As I said before, we invited people to submit questions in advance, and we have 7 questions initially that people have actually said they're willing to ask in person. Hopefully everybody's here that said that. So the first question is from Jane Oliver. Is Jane here? Jane, if you can fire away.
Will you admit that the NHS is broken and is the only way forward an insurance scheme?
And what I'll do is I'll go right along that way, and then we'll go back and forth, back and forth. So first, we'll stay sitting down, try and be as comfortable as possible. We'll start with Graham, and then we'll work down this way.
If I'm not standing up, maybe it's best to use this if it's working. Hopefully it works all right. Is the NHS broken? I don't think it is. We've had the pandemic, and that led to obviously a huge backlog. It hasn't been helped by the striking doctors. But we're seeing, contrary to what Linda said, we're actually seeing waiting lists really coming down fast now. And I think, we have an insurance policy, if you like, already, and that's through our tax system. I think it has the broad support that we have a tax system which is progressive, and that then supports healthcare, so that we don't ever have a situation where people are denied healthcare based on their ability to pay. So I think it is about managing it. It's one of the challenges we have in this area, and I work closely with people in this room and beyond, because I chair Holderness Health, is trying to make sure that everything isn't based on the hub. And one of the dangers, I think, and fears if there is a Labour government, there tends to be a concentration in the big cities and a loss of focus on bringing out services to places like Withensea, and other parts of my constituency. So that's really important. I'm delighted to see 10,000 more diagnostic tests in Beverley for a start, working hard with ministers, and I've taken that to the highest level to push to make sure that these mobile dentistry, because people were quite right to highlight the challenge of getting NHS dentistry, that we get that in place as well. We have 45,000 more doctors, 45,000 more doctors and 75,000 more nurses than in 2010, because we have a strong economy thanks to Conservative management of it. And in fact the NHS spend today is now £165 billion, and that relies on having people who can run the economy, who can ensure that we get that balance right between enterprise being rewarded, producing the funds which are required to give us the kind of healthcare we want for everybody. That, I think, could be at risk if we have a Labour government, because typically they end up with higher unemployment, weaken the economy, and that goes to the root of undermining the NHS.
I would say that the NHS is, you could say, a breaking point, or even if it is broken, everything that is broken can be fixed. It just needs the will and the right investment in the right places. I would say our NHS over the last 14 years has been knowingly underfunded. It's had creeping privatisation, and it's got to the point now where the systems that we have are so degraded that it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of effort to actually bring it back to what it was its former glory. For me, it's the pride of Britain is the NHS. I think that healthcare is a basic fundamental human right. I don't think anyone in this country should ever go to a hospital or a doctor's and have to bring out their credit card or their insurance scheme just to be seen. I think an insurance scheme in this country would be disastrous. We see over 500,000 bankruptcies every year in the USA based on medical bills. And if you think of an insurance scheme, you're going to have premiums, and those are based on risk. So as you get older, your premiums will rise and they will become unaffordable. It will be an increasing burden on what is already a low pension by standards of other OECD countries. And ultimately, if you can't pay your excess at the start, then you'll just go without healthcare. We'll become a sicker nation, and it won't benefit healthcare whatsoever in this country. We need proper investment in the right places, and we need to be honest that it is going to take a monumental effort and a lot of investment to bring the NHS back to what we know it could be.
I've just listened to all the statistics that Graham has given us, but I don't see that reflecting in what most people see in their local health service. The amount of people that you're saying, I can't get an appointment, I can't speak to a doctor, I've got God knows how long to wait for an operation. Yes, the NHS is broken, and it's not down to lack of funding, it's how it's managed. There is waste in every single government operation. And I'll give you an example. I, as a contractor, 2 of the main hospitals in Wakefield, I used to do quite a bit of work there, and I have to say, work that did not need doing. I had to go into 2 of their buildings, these are just 2 instances in particular. They were empty. Maybe there were 3-4 dozen rooms of one sort or another in each of these buildings. Not a soul in them, but it was so hot in there, in the middle of summer, the doors and windows had to be open. I asked why. Nobody knows how to turn it off. Exactly the same in a different hospital building at a different hospital. That is only the tip of the iceberg. You all know how much your electricity and gas bills are at home. Imagine how much it is to heat a hospital, and nobody knows how to turn it off. Multiply that by every hospital that is in the country. You don't have to be good at maths to work out that the bills for all that could pay nurses, consultants, whatever you need to make the health service better. So you can pump as much money as you want into the health service, and it won't make the slightest scrap of difference, because nobody is accountable. Nobody knows where that money goes to. And I think, yes, it's broken. I don't think insurance is the way. I think efficiency is the way. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for the question, James. So the answer, I think, is no and no, but 14 years of the Conservatives, I think, have brought the NHS to its knees. When Labour left office in 2010, we had the lowest waiting lists on record and the highest patient satisfaction. And now, I'm sorry, whatever Graham says, they've increased 350,000 under Rishi Sunak alone, and another 5 years are going to see it in the millions. I've got on my team, my campaign team, I've got GPs, I've got nurses, I've got junior doctors, and they're singing a very different song from Mr. Stewart, and they're the people who actually work in the health service. And can I just say as a side, talking about waste, the scandal of PPE in the election, millions of pounds of public money going on contracts to Tory cronies for equipment that didn't work and that wasn't delivered to our frontline services and to our healthcare workers. That was a scandal. So Labour's fully funded plans to tackle these, we are pledging 40,000 extra appointments a week, 700,000 urgent dental appointments, 8,500 mental health professionals. My daughter had serious mental health problems as a teenager. She was told she would have to wait 15 months to 2 years for help. She's now just qualified as a psychotherapist, so I'm very proud of her. Now that's vision, that's ambition. And dentistry, it's an absolute dental desert. Those are Mr. Stewart's words. He's described this as a dental desert, as it is. Did you know the single highest reason for children being taken into A&E is tooth decay? So Labour's promised to create 100,000 extra dental appointments for children. I've worked with the 3 Labour MPs in Hull, campaigning to get a dental school at the Hull and York Medical School, so we're building and recruiting dentists for the future. On insurance, I've lived and worked in Germany and America that have insurance systems. Germany's works better. I've had good care in both places, but I've been lucky. And access to healthcare should never be a matter of luck. The NHS is still the best system for delivering healthcare free at the point of need. And I think we are proud of that. It's not broken, but it needs to be fixed. And I believe that Labour has the policies. Labour founded the NHS. Labour will always care for the NHS.
Yes, I believe the NHS is broken currently, and there's a lot we can do about it. So our leader, Ted Kong, he's been a jobbing GP all his career, latterly a police GP, and he's got a lot of suggestions how to fix things. And he says it's all built around perverse incentives. For example, you know, during the pandemic, the doctors were incentivised £12 for every injection and £22 for children. So if you wanted, you got your text, your emails coming for your jab, coming tomorrow for your jab. But if you wanted a knee replacement or a hip replacement, oh, we can't do that, that's going to be years away. And so the incentives need changing. So if doctors wrote COVID on a death certificate, they received £3,000 for a COVID death certificate. If you put flu on the death certificate, say, if you put flu on the death certificate, you receive nothing. So what is your practice manager going to ask you to put on that death certificate? He's going to ask you to put COVID, and your practice will receive £3,000. And that was a lot how the pandemic was all, everybody had COVID and died of COVID, and they were dying with all sorts of things, but it was always COVID. So I had it with my mother-in-law. She died in a care home of old age 94, and she got a water infection, which she'd had before, and she was ready to pass away. She'd had dementia for 10 years, so the nurse diagnosed her over the telephone. Well, Emmy, she couldn't even speak English, she garbled. So she never spoke to Emmy, but Emmy got COVID on the death certificate. And when we challenged it for a year through the NHS, it came back. Oh, it was 51% COVID, 49%, all the other hundreds of things she had, like COPD, old age dementia, etc. And ka-ching, the surgery collected the £3,000. It was all corrupt from top to bottom. And that's all I've got to say on it at the moment.
Thanks very much. I think this is the biggest issue that's affecting the electorate at this election, and that's why devolution is so important. Obviously, I find myself having certain levels of agreement with both Margaret and Graham. Graham at least has said that the public funding model for the NHS is the right way to go. I totally agree with that. Margaret has said that, you know, when the last, she referred to dentistry, for example. We've got an epidemic in dentistry in this country. Unfortunately, I don't think Labour's got the answer for that. When Keir Starmer was asked last week about his NHS dentistry, he said, I go private because as an adult I don't get free NHS dentistry. The man who wants to be the Prime Minister doesn't understand that adults, myself included, for the last 50 years have been paying for their NHS dentist treatment. And I think that shows, I think Keir was badly let down last week by some of his advisors. But I do have a question to Graham. Graham, what planet are you living on? Because the truth of the matter is that your stewardship, your wonderful stewardship of the economy has brought us negative growth and a stagnant economy. It's there for everybody to see. Before the pandemic, Graham, waiting lists had doubled. That was before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we had 100,000 vacancies in the NHS. We've now got 125,000 vacancies in the NHS. And before Brexit, which has done enormous damage to the NHS, to social care and to dentistry, we had a lot of really good people working on our behalf, representing us in our NHS. But what I find most disappointing, and this is what really comes home about devolution, we suffer chronic underfunding in Yorkshire to the tune of £2,500 per head of the population in government investment. And when the Labour spokesperson was asked 2 weeks ago how he would get NHS waiting lists down, he said, we're going to pay nurses and pay doctors to work evenings and work weekends. What does he think they're already doing? My stepdaughter works 13-hour shifts, she's on her knees, and Labour is going to pay her to work overtime. You can't get a quart, as they say, out of a pint pot. And that's where we're coming from. But last year, the NHS delivered 10 million operations in 3,000 theatres. I think they do a wonderful job. I don't think it's broken, but God, it needs our help. Thanks, yeah. Sorry.
Well, yeah, bits of our NHS are definitely broken. Costs are rocketing and it needs better funding. And we already have an insurance scheme. It's called National Insurance, but the Tories have reduced contributions to it in their recent tax-cutting exercise. And, of course, National Insurance doesn't only fund healthcare, it funds things like pensions, invalidity benefits, maternity leave, sick leave, etc. The Liberals' Beveridge report in 1942 was the blueprint for the NHS, and that was put in place by the Labour Party in 1946. And we are incredibly proud as Liberal Democrats of our NHS, and it ain't going nowhere as far as we're concerned. It is the envy of the world and will remain a universal, high-quality healthcare system which is free at the point of access under our watch. And the reason for that is because good health gives people freedom to live their lives as they want to live them. It also means that the good health of the population means we have an active, contributing workforce, and that's how we grow our wealth. And if people are sick, and at the moment we have thousands on the waiting list, no matter what Graham has just said, that means that we have people who are waiting for operations or treatment who cannot contribute, and that is just wrong. So how are we going to fix it? Well, we're going to increase funding by 1.5%. That's an increase of up to 8.35 billion. Because let's face it, our NHS deserves it. Our staff who work in the NHS deserve to be treated properly, fairly, and respectfully. We're back to this dignity thing again. It is so important that we recognise the value of everybody who contributes to our society, and don't our nurses and doctors and care workers do just that. 1.5% is greater than Labour's 1.1% and the Tories' 0.9%. Your maths is probably better than mine, but that's a lot less than the Liberal Democrats are promising. As to an Irish style or German style or even American style insurance system, we are not in favour of that idea, as that is just what we see as yet another tax. And we are committed to not increasing personal taxes for anybody. We will tax the wealthy, we will tax big business, we will tax the banks, we will tax the sewage companies for sewage discharges that we could do without. but we will not put in place another tax on people. That removes the whole ethos of the NHS of being free to all, at the point of use, accessible to everyone, whether they can pay or not. Long live our NHS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before we go to the next question, I'm aiming for an 8 o'clock comfort break. So we've got 25 minutes of questions before we reach 8 o'clock. So if I can ask the candidates to be concise as possible in their answers, and we can maybe get as many questions in before that 8 o'clock and then a few afterwards. So if that's all right, so we'll crack on. Patricia Whittaker. Patricia, yeah, that's right.
Good evening, everybody. The climate crisis is already destroying the natural world and causing mass displacement of people in the poorest parts of the world. We know that we need to move away from fossil fuels to have any chance of combating it. So would you work to ensure that the UK ends all new oil, gas and coal projects and phases out existing ones?
Thank you, Patricia. A very relevant question, obviously, in this part of the world, because it is the energy estuary, and there's obviously easing on the coast, Saltend just across the road, really, and other developments elsewhere. Hydrogen being on the headlines for the future, perhaps, of Saltend. But I'll start with Linda at this, and we'll work this way around this time, I'm afraid. So, Linda, can you?
I hope you're going to mix it up a bit.
I'm going to mix it up, yeah.
Well, anybody who knows me knows that the environment and green issues are what I live and die with. I am a vegan. I have a competition with as many people as I possibly can to reduce my carbon footprint. So I do drive a plug-in hybrid, but that's because we don't have enough EV charging points in this part of the world. So guess what we would be doing? Putting in more EV charging points. The first thing that we're going to do is scrap the so-called investment allowance loophole on the oil and gas industry and tax those companies' super profits, since we first called for that in 2021, which has now been adopted by Labour. Thank you very much, Labour, for that. And together with innovative British businesses, we will make the UK the renewable and clean technologies capital of the world. We will help houses, households, buildings, industry, everyone to transition to those innovative new green technologies. We will drive a rooftop revolution in solar. And we just don't really understand why all new houses are not, and all new buildings do not have solar panels as standard. We will reintroduce the ban on fossil fuel cars after 2030 and increase EV charging points, as mentioned. We will appoint a Chief Secretary to the Treasury on sustainability and establish a new net zero delivery authority to coordinate activities across government departments so that they all become net zero. And we aim to ensure that we are net zero by 2045 overall. We'll establish local and national citizens' assemblies so you can decide the best way to become net zero as a community, whether that's generating your own electricity or developing other projects that will encourage net carbon zero. And we will ensure that part of our international development funding, which will return to 0.7% of GDP, is used to help other countries also tackle their carbon footprints. And then there's our Environmental Rights Act, which I think is really important, because that will allow you to challenge these companies who just pollute the earth, who are spewing out sewage, who are using fossil fuels, which of course are not helping our environment. They are just causing more and more carbon to be spewed into the atmosphere. And that is only part of what we intend to do. So I hope that gives you a flavour. But I think national assemblies and local assemblies, so that you can get involved and you can advise and you can do what you need to do, is really key. Thank you.
Local and national assemblies, absolutely. That's what I'm arguing for. I think, with great respect to some of the other members of the panel, I'm a trained scientist. I was very fortunate to do some work down in the Falkland Islands just after the war, where I saw a completely different environment to the one that's there today. The truth of the matter is, whether people like to admit it or not, climate change is a reality. And it's a reality that's going to wreck millions and millions of people's lives. Now, if the world's temperatures go up by 1.5%, in the next 25 years, be aware that most of the Humber estuary will flood. That's from Hull all the way up through Beverley, and it's going to be affecting us. And when countries, especially countries in the poorer parts of the world, find that the economies are totally devastated by climate change, guess what they're going to do? They're going to get in small boats, they're going to get in planes, they're going to try and find a means of escape. Because when people are threatened in the way in which they're faced, that's exactly what will happen. It will be worse than the consequences of the Second World War. So we have to be very conscious of that. The Yorkshire Party want us to try and address the issues here in Yorkshire, and we believe that we can do that by ensuring increased public investment, which would draw in, as Economic Institute of Social Research said in Radio 4 this morning, private sector investment that will help us to deal with the potential consequences. The government spends £59 billion a year in Yorkshire at the minute, but compared to London and Scotland, per head of population, we're shortchanged to the tune of £14 billion a year. Imagine what we could do with that. I'm going to answer the question, try and answer a question that you asked about why solar panels aren't automatically included in new build. I put that very proposal to the leader of the Labour Party 15 years ago, and it was rejected because we don't want to put obstacles in the way of developers. And that's the fear. The fear is that if we add costs on, which are minimal at this stage, developers aren't going to build the houses. We've got a housing crisis, and one of the most important things that we can do to deal with the environmental challenges is to deal with the housing crisis.
So I disagree with much of what George is saying and the rest of the panel. So I'm going to spin the question on its head a little bit. I'm assuming it's based on the presumption that energy charges are going to stay high and we're going to be a scarcity of energy with solar and wind power. But that just isn't the fact, the reality of the situation. Because governments speaking a game, but they're playing a completely different game without them spending the money. So governments around the world will go nuclear in the next few years. There is no doubt about that, because wind and solar will not keep the lights on. So we was all installed with smart meters, wasn't we, over the last 20 years? Well, why was that we was all forced to get these smart meters to save a few bob on our electric? Well, it wasn't about that. Smart meters can be turned off remotely from the central area, so when there's not enough wind and there's not enough sun, they can switch off people on, like what people that are as old as me might remember, rolling blackouts in the early 1970s. And that's why smart meters was installed. This was all pre-planned years in advance. So we're going to go nuclear. It's going to be, give me a speech. So we're going to go nuclear. It's going to happen. Nothing's going to stop it. There's going to be plenty of energy, and it's going to be much cheaper. And it might take 5 or 10 years to achieve that. But in the meantime, are we going to spend a fortune insulating our houses? We should continue as we are now. Yes, we should have double glazing, insulate our roof, try to stop the drafts. But there's no need to go silly and install heat pumps and other expensive measures when energy is going to come back down in the near future and we're all going nuclear around the world.
Right, well, yes, there is a climate crisis and it's affecting this constituency, as George has mentioned. Flooding is a real risk here. So Labour is fully committed to tackling the climate crisis and hitting net zero targets. I'm aware we've had to row back on some of the level of money we can commit to that, but that's been as a result of the disastrous Liz Truss mini-budget. Graham Stewart has consistently voted against improving biodiversity, against improving air quality, against improving environmental water quality, against regulation of fracking, against the preservation of environmental protections, and against measures to prevent climate change. Labour will make Britain a clean energy superpower. You will have heard about the idea of Great British Energy, which will cut bills and bring energy independence, which is important for national security. And in the process, it will create 650,000 new jobs. So that energy mission to drive down energy bills will make our businesses internationally more competitive, and we have a vision for a national wealth fund which will support the most energy intensive sectors like steel to decarbonise. We'll also force the water companies to clean up our rivers and coasts. And we also need to make sure that the framework for that policy making is actually green and helps us reach net zero and our carbon budget. So the decision by this government, Conservative government, to prevent the Bank of England giving due consideration to climate change in its mandates will be reversed. Oil and gas, Graham has claimed that they're good for the environment. He's taken donations from local businesses involved in the oil industry, asked BP about incentives, about how to argue that oil and gas is a good thing and part of the net zero transition. I don't buy that. I don't think anybody else buys that. So flooding, the government's flood defence has failed to meet its own targets. Over 500 flood defences schemes cancelled. Labour has an idea for a flood defence tax force that it will bring in to actually anticipate flooding, to look at vulnerable areas like Holderness, and not just deal with a reactive plan for flooding, but actually to have a proactive plan looking at central government, local government, emergency services and communities. There are a lot of things in the Labour budget. It is a green budget. It is a budget with a high vision. There is a climate crisis and we need to start tackling it now.
I don't think that net zero is an option at the moment. Not for a long, long time.